Gabo here with BrassReel Brothers. That last scene I just showed was from Octopussy. It's a scene in there that has always been hilarious to me, and I freaking forgot to put it in the last review of Octopussy. But I think it's so hilarious how that guy reacts when he gets shot. Well, anyways, thanks for coming back for some more hot, fresh popcorns and another episode of James Bond Never Dies. Yeah, this time part 4, where we're covering every actor who ever played James Bond, reviewing one of the films from each actor, and ranking the actors 1 through 6. So for this episode, we're talking about the junior black sheep of the franchise, Timothy Dalton. Or in this episode I'm calling Dapper Dalton. So Timothy Dalton did 2 movies in the franchise, and he was right after Roger Moore. And oddly enough, he had a dimple in his chin just like George Lazenby. George Lazenby did 1 film, which was kind of a segue movie, and Dalton did 2 films. And they both kind of act a little similar to each other in my opinion. They're sort of that kind of don't give a F Bond, or as I like to say, don't give a feel good. But the rumor has it with Timothy Dalton is one of the reasons he only did 2 movies is that they couldn't get Pierce Brosnan. They were trying to get Pierce Brosnan to do it at the time, but he had a contract with Remington Steele. I don't know if you guys remember that show. It was basically like a TV show James Bond, but his name was Remington Steele. But they had pegged him for that since when they saw that show, and they were like, we gotta have him, but he couldn't get out of his contract with Remington Steele, so they got Timothy Dalton to do it. I think it's a shame that he didn't get to do more than 2 movies. I would have at least liked for him to get to do like 4, because I thought he was a good Bond. I thought he was badass. I thought he was direct. I thought he was to the point. He was believable. But at this point, if you watch my Roger Moore or Octopussy review, the James Bond franchise had just become something that was kind of laughable. It was sort of like a popcorn type movie, but not like in a good way. More of a popcorn movie where you're just sort of, all right, here we go again. This is goofy, and it's just like insert joke here, insert joke there. And that just was ruining Bond for me. I wasn't alive at the time, but even as a kid, when I was watching those movies, I was like, this is what Bond is? So every time they changed Bond, it's always been based on a different set of circumstances. When George Lazenby was filling the shoes, it was because Sean Connery just told him he didn't want to do it anymore. Kind of blindsided the studios. Then Connery came back for 1 more, and then they knew they were going to switch gears completely with Roger Moore. That one did so well, they signed him on for multiple films, but when Roger Moore was done, he was done. It wasn't any bad blood. Him and the studio both mutually were like, hey man, peace out. Let's call this quits. And he'll always hold that sort of slapstick genre of Bond in my heart, but like I said, it's my least favorite. But Dalton came back in and just swept back in and saved the day and made Bond badass again. I mean, right from the get-go when you see him, it's no BS. And they actually went that way in the tone of the films, even though they're still directed by John Glenn. That's right, both of the movies Timothy Dalton did were directed by John Glenn, who directed 3 of the Roger Moore films and then worked on more of them total behind the scenes. Anyways, I already talked about that in my last video. But immediately they switched that slapstick tone to something a little more serious. They're like, we gotta change this now. Dalton was younger, so right away for me, he's more believable. But what I liked about his representation of Bond, he was definitely an ask permission later Bond. He was direct. If you notice, all the other Bonds kind of had this slow talking pace to them, slow talking rhythm and cadence.
Bond. James Bond.
Even the way they moved was a little smoother and cool. Timothy Dalton's Bond is very direct with what he says. He talks really fast, and he moves really fast.
I need to use your phone. Should call you back.
Who are you?
Bond, James Bond.
And I kind of like that in the way that he decided to portray Bond. Because to me, it's very no nonsense. It's get to the point, which is kind of like the way Daniel Craig did it. I feel like Daniel Craig kind of pulled from Timothy Dalton and George Lazenby's Bond a little more than he pulled from Roger Moore and Sean Connery. That's just my theory on it. I'm not sure. And since Timothy Dalton only did 2 movies, I'm going to kind of talk about both of them. I do like one of them more than the other, but he did Living Daylights and he also did License to Kill. License to Kill, they were finding their groove with Timothy Dalton as Bond, and the movie itself is just way better, I think. Which is, again, kind of a shame that Dalton stopped doing them after that. One of the cool things he does have in common with George Lazenby is they were both the 2 guys that had the dimples. They were both dimple Bonds. Brosnan had a little bit of a dimple chin, kind of like a starter dimple chin, but nothing like the dimps that Lazenby and Dalton had. Dalton and Lazenby both had that straight up dimple right in the middle of their chin. Man, that's a funny word, right? Dimple. Dimple, 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 dimple. Ever wonder why some of us have a dimple on the chin? Hey, woo! So when I was growing up watching a bunch of Bond movies, I was slowly but surely finding out about another Bond movie here, another Bond movie there. Most of the time, the only way I got to see them was on like the TBS marathons, or sometimes I would be able to rent one, but most of the time I was catching them on TV. Later on, I ended up buying all the VHS when they re-released them when GoldenEye came out. Obviously, I own them all now on DVD and Blu-ray, but the only Timothy Dalton James Bond movie I actually knew about as a kid was License to Kill, because I saw that poster in the theater when I was a kid. That was the first James Bond movie poster I ever saw in the theater, because it came out in '89, and that's when Batman came out. So I just remember seeing that poster in the theater. Oh, he's so badass! But they used the formula immediately again. They're not taking away from any of the formula, they're just switching tone. Sorry, Grandpa Jimmy Bond, but you're out of here! And right from the get-go, great opening scene. I think that License to Kill is a better opening scene than Living Daylights, but you still get to see what type of Bond they're going for immediately. It's like, all right, he's young, he's believable, I actually buy it. Roger Moore was just too, I don't know what he was, man. Just like I said, Grandpa Jimmy. So for me, as I was growing and watching the Bond movies more and more and more, when I finally found these, I was like, good, at least they're back on a better track. And then once GoldenEye came out, that sort of changed everything, but we'll get to that. But the opening scene in License to Kill, I'm not gonna get into the specifics of what's going on, but they straight up did the Dark Knight Rises before the Dark Knight Rises did it. Mr. Bond. Yeah, Dark Knight Rises ripped off that whole lifting the plane up in the air scene. They definitely were spending a lot of money with these movies. It's got an awesome opening song in License to Kill as well. That's really great. It's very, very contemporary, early 90s sounding. But Living Daylights has a song by Aha that's awesome. I love that song. It might be one of my favorite ones in the franchise, but I love 80s music. Speaking of 80s music, right away in the opening scene of Living Daylights, when Bond's getting some action, you get to hear all this like 80s style Bond music you've never heard before in the prior films, because all the Roger Moore movies, it was either score or 70s sounding music. But this, I mean, it is score, but it's like 80s and techno Bond sounding music. I love it. But I do think that License to Kill is a pretty significant jump better than Living Daylights. Living Daylights is great. It's a lot of just solid action stories there. You're getting introduced to this new Bond and everything. But I just think that License to Kill is a better story. It's got better villains. It's got my favorite Bond girl in it of all time. Let's talk about the Bond girls real quick. The lead actress in Living Daylights is Miriam Diabo. In License to Kill, it's Thaisa Soto or Talisa Soto. But then the other Bond girl in License to Kill is Carrie Lau. But woo! She's my favorite Bond girl of all time. Just something about the way there's like when you first see her in the movie, she's just got some sort of like 80s/90s hair. But later on in the movie, she's in cahoots with Bond, so she has to like change her style up a little bit, and she cuts her hair, and man, no kidding, hands down, my favorite Bond girl of all time. Disagree with me in the comments if you want to, but that's just how I feel. I love her. Rewatched it again today. Woo! But everything about both of these two movies was a well-needed and welcomed upgrade from what we had seen with Roger Moore. The music was better, the action was better, Bond was better, everything was feeling real, it worked, because Dalton wasn't a grandpa. The villain or villains are kind of so-so in Living Daylights, but the villain in License to Kill is badass. Maybe my favorite Bond villain, played by Robert Davi, one of the Fratelli brothers from Goonies. But he's awesome in this. He's a brutal villain that enjoys watching people die. He jacks up two different people in two different pretty brutal ways, and they don't like show it, but you get the idea. And you also got a young, hot Benicio del Toro. Yeah, I said it! Way before he was anybody. He's super young in this. But speaking of the villains in Living Daylights, I just have to bring this up. There's a guy, his name is an actor named Joe Don Baker. He plays a guy named Brad Whitaker in this movie, who's this just stupid American villain in Living Daylights. He shows up in GoldenEye with Pierce Brosnan as some completely other different character. It wasn't even like way down the line. It was just two movies away from each other. The same actor was two different characters in the Bond franchise. I don't know, that's just weird to me. But yeah, Robert Davi, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. Like I said, one of the Fratelli brothers from Goonies, and he's in 1,000 other movies, but he's phenomenal in this. I love him as a villain. He's a sleazy 80s, 90s villain that you want. Just everything you're looking for. He's threatening. The way he portrays the character is badass the whole time. Like I said, I just believe it. And Benicio is awesome too. He's a slimy little henchman to Robert Davi. His name's Sanchez in the movie. Perfect. Plays like a drug lord. But one of the really cool things I like about License to Kill that's awesome, which most of the time they do this with a Bond character in the movies, I prefer those movies over the other movies, is that they make it personal. This one is a revenge story. Yeah, the character Felix, who's been portrayed by 10 actors over the series, his wife gets killed in this, and they try to kill him by feeding him to sharks.
Stop anything, Sanchez!
Yeah, it's pretty jacked up. And it's conveyed really well on screen too. And that scene where they're feeding him to the sharks, Benicio has the hilarious line,
"Where's my wife?" We gave her a nice honeymoon.
Hilarious. But yeah, anytime Bond does a revenge story or anything like that, it's always my favorite. On Her Majesty's Secret Service, this one, Casino Royale, or basically the entire Daniel Craig era, but we'll get into that later. To me, it's just always more entertaining when things get personal for Bond. Living Daylights, the setting in that one, it's kind of like this Kazakhstan, Afghanistan, Russian type setting. Like there's even one part where they're on like horses and they're wearing turbans, like even on the cover of that. License to Kill takes place kind of like in the Cuban, South Florida type area, and a lot of stuff is on the ocean. I like that kind of stuff. Anything that's sort of aquatic feeling in movies like this, especially James Bond films, I love. Living Daylights, you're getting to know Bond again. You're getting introduced to a new era of Bond, which nobody actually knew at the time that it was going to end so quickly because Pierce's contract with Remington Steele ended and they just scooped him up. But they were switching gears, and a lot of this bled over into the Pierce Brosnan phase as well. But like I said, when they change and switch gears, they really switch gears. Like Lois Maxwell, who was always Moneypenny, is no longer Moneypenny. It's a girl named Caroline Bliss, and she was only in these two movies. They updated the headquarters. The headquarters prior to this was always sort of like very British and sort of like monarchy feeling. This one, it's very like 90s high-tech feeling, kind of like the way it felt in GoldenEye and pretty much every Bond movie after this. But you still have M in it. The way they put Q in there is pretty cool, because now instead of Q just being like a gadget man, which he still comes in with all kinds of cool gadgets, like there's this one scene where they're definitely making reference to more modern times, where he points to the guy with the boombox.
Something we're making for the Americans. It's called a ghetto blaster.
But instead of him just being the gadget man, he's actually more of a team player in this. He actually helps Bond along the way, which they started to implement that more with the Q character later on in more movies. But they kind of started that with the Timothy Dalton era. So some people dog on Dalton. Some people say he was just a filler Bond. I personally like Dalton. I think that he brought a lot back to Bond, what we were missing with Roger Moore. After a full decade of just having a lot of jokes and slapstick, I thought that Dalton brought the badassery to Bond back that we needed and missed, which is why I'm putting him on the list at number 4. Yeah, don't hate me, he just means a lot to me. Like I said, he was the first Bond poster I ever saw. I do think that he brought life back into the Bond character where it was losing its way. And his two movies have their own specific feel in the franchise. Just like every actor's movies have their own specific feel, these do. If you haven't seen them, I say watch both of them. If you can only watch one of them, I say watch License to Kill, but they're both really good. I love Dalton, and he's sexy. Yeah, I said it! Well, with that being said, guys, thanks for tuning in for some more hot, fresh popcorns. Make sure you look for the next video coming up where I'm going to be talking about old Pierce Brosnan. But you got to tune in to see which movie I'm going to be covering. Look for BrassReel Brothers on Facebook. You can look for me, Bobby Williams, on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter, BrassReel Bobby at BrassReel. And remember to hit that subscribe button so you can help us make it to the top. And as always, if life gives you lemons, make some hot, fresh popcorn.
Sweet dreams, Mr. Bond.